Support for today's episode comes from Amazon. Amazon is working toward a carbon free energy future, doing more with less, investing where it matters most, and supporting communities where we operate. Ireland's Grid Now asks which data centers are credible. Ireland's electricity regulator has stopped granting grid access on a first come basis and started grading data center developers on whether their renewable energy plans are credible enough to trust. Ireland's electricity regulator no longer asks only how much power a proposed data center needs. Since December 2025, it has asked whether the developer behind that request can prove, with a concrete plan for new renewable generation, that it deserves a place in an increasingly constrained queue. The Commission for Regulation of Utilities issued that decision on December 12th, replacing a 2021 framework that could not keep pace with how fast data center demand was consuming the national grid. The scale of that consumption explains the urgency. Data centers accounted for 5% of Ireland's electricity demand in 2015 and 22% by 2024, and EirGrid now forecasts that share will reach 31% by 2034 as demand from the sector roughly doubles, from 9.4 terawatt hours in 2025 to 14.6 terawatt hours in 2034. A country of 5 million people is now planning its grid around a customer segment that did not meaningfully exist a decade earlier, and the old connection process, built for a broad regional view of capacity, was never designed to sort serious developers from speculative ones at that scale. Why a regional forecast could no longer do the job. Under the previous framework, system operators evaluated data center connection requests against broad regional capacity estimates rather than the specific technical conditions of each site. That approach worked reasonably well when data centers were a small, scattered load. It stopped working once demand concentrated heavily in one metro area. Dublin now accounts for roughly half of its region's electricity demand from data centers alone, according to legal analysis of the CRU decision. And the network in and around the capital is more constrained than a regional average would suggest. The CRU's new policy, formally called the Large Energy Users Connection Policy, directs EirGrid and ESB networks to assess each application against the specific location and condition of the network it would connect to, not a regional average. That single change forced the system operators to build tools they did not previously need: granular capacity maps, zone-by-zone constraint data, and a documented process for weighing one applicant against another. What Ireland's new policy actually requires: the policy rests on two central requirements. New data centers must provide generation or storage capacity, either on-site or nearby, sized to match their requested demand and able to participate in the wholesale electricity market. They must also meet at least 80% of their annual demand with new, additional renewable projects built in Ireland, with a 6-year window to bring that renewable capacity online. Crucially, developers must present system operators with a credible plan for delivering that renewable capacity before a connection offer is made, rather than a general commitment to source clean power eventually. That credibility standard is the real departure from how Ireland used to plan its grid. A regional forecast could tolerate uncertainty about which specific projects would materialize. A location-specific, developer-by-developer credibility test cannot, because unrealized renewable commitments create exactly the kind of gap between contracted and delivered capacity that has already become a credibility problem in other electricity markets. System operators have already started enforcing it. EirGrid and ESB networks met their implementation deadline. By March 31st, 2026, both operators had published engagement and connection processes for data center applicants, including minimum performance requirements for on-site generation and storage. EirGrid followed in May with a data center constrained area overview, an interim locational map showing where the transmission network has room for new demand and where it does not, ahead of a fuller set of heat maps due in the 2027 10-year transmission forecast statement. ESB Networks now runs its own case-by-case constraint assessment across 27 distribution planning zones. The policy also scales its requirements by size. Data centers under 1 megavolt ampere face no substantive generation requirement at all, while larger projects are sorted into tiers with progressively stricter on-site generation obligations. That tiered structure gives Ireland something closer to what large private grid projects elsewhere have pursued by building their own generation from the start, except applied through regulation, rather than left to individual developers to solve on their own. Unlike temporary moratoriums that simply delay new connections, Ireland has built a permanent screening framework that tries to distinguish between projects that strengthen the electricity system and projects that only add demand to it. Other constrained markets have so far leaned on pauses rather than a standing credibility test. Amsterdam froze new data center approvals outright in 2019 before reopening under stricter efficiency rules, and Singapore did the same before replacing its pause with a selective, sustainability-scored application process in 2022. If Ireland's version holds up as more applications move through it, the model, not just the moratorium, is what other regulators are likely to study. What comes next for developers weighing Ireland? The next real test of the credibility standard will not come from the policy document itself, but from how consistently EirGrid and ESB networks apply it as more applications arrive. The 2027 10-year transmission forecast statement will show whether the constrained area maps published so far actually shrink the gap between available capacity and requested demand, or whether Dublin's concentration problem simply pushes the same congestion into new zones. For now, the clearest signal of how the new system performs will be the applicants who make it through, not the ones still waiting to apply. Sustainability Soundbites Energy coverage is sponsored by Amazon. Visit the link in our show notes to learn more about Amazon's Spotlight on Energy. For sponsorship opportunities with Environment and Energy Leader, please reach out to a member of our team.